Alright, and welcome back to probably what's going to be the last video of the night, talking about my Ascendant series in astrology and what happens when a person has their Ascendant or their first house or their rising sign, those all mean the same thing, in the sign of Gemini. Okay, so as I said previously, the Ascendant or the first house, it signifies all your other house systems. The houses of your astrological birth chart, they map out the backdrop of your life, and they all represent different areas of your life, such as your money and wealth. That would be the second house. Your creativity, that would be the fifth house. Basically, every area of your life has a corresponding house associated with it, and those house numbers correspond to the archetypes of particular signs. So, if somebody has their ascendant in Gemini, what does this mean? What does this mean about this person? Okay, so the first house being Gemini, the first house always corresponds to Aries. It represents action, goals, your fundamental orientation in this life. If your first house is Gemini, your fundamental orientation is going to be about information and communication. So these people are they tend to be defined by their intelligence, and they tend to be defined by their ability to communicate and to learn. These people's second house is typically Cancer. Second house, again, always associates to Taurus. If the second house is Cancer, that's a very good placement, because that means these people tend to have their physical material needs are met by the way of their emotions, essentially. So if something makes them feel good, like if a material thing, a food, a piece of clothing, something like that, if it makes them feel good, they will be preferential to it. So it has nothing to do with the cost of the thing. It has nothing to do with how it looks. It's about their emotional connection to that item or to that food that determines whether they like it or not. These people's third house again always associates to Gemini, communication and syntax and the word choice you use. These people's third house is typically Leo. So if your third house is Leo, that means your communication is very clear, it's very direct, and it doesn't tend to falter very much, because the Leo is ruled by the sun, and the sun never goes retrograde, so it's always very clear communication, and it tends to be very precise and illuminating and bold, because Leo also represents leadership, so these people can organize small groups of people with their speech quite easily. The fourth house of the Gemini Ascendant is Virgo. So the fourth house being Virgo, fourth house associates to Cancer, which represents home, emotions, feelings, and preferences, emotional preferences, things that make you feel happy. These people, their emotions are, since Virgo represents illnesses and enemies among other things, their emotions can be a little bit disorganized, and they have to organize them throughout their life. They tend to have emotional health issues, but they also tend to love analysis and just the idea of knowing that there are certain things that are facts and certain things that aren't facts makes them feel very secure. So in a way, if their Mercury is well placed, because their fourth house and their first house, Gemini and Virgo, are always going to get their power from Mercury. If their Mercury is well placed and they're intelligent, they can organize their emotional health. But if their Mercury is badly placed, if it's in Pisces or Cancer or a sign that does not necessarily favor Mercury, then they can be kind of emotional train wrecks and can be very reactive. So these people's fifth house, which represents creativity and art and corresponds to Leo, is Libra. So these people tend to express their creativity through their art of negotiation. If you've ever read like The Art of the Deal by Donald Trump, Donald Trump isn't a Gemini ascendant, but he is a Gemini sun, and these things do carry over. He says basically, plain and simple, negotiation is his art form, and these people are they find, because Libra represents sort of pleasant communication as well as tactful communication. So these people's creativity is typically expressed through words and the ability to simplify complicated concepts into palatable statements. The sixth house of these people is Scorpio. Sixth house represents Virgo, and Virgo represents health, daily routine, tasks, your enemies, and your ability to like basically organize your life and personal hygiene and health, that kind of thing. So because these people's sixth house is Scorpio, these people are incredibly deeply interested in all things informational. They're obsessed with facts. They have a very emotional, intense connection to understanding all the different types of information out there, and they're never really satisfied with just one thing. They always want to learn more and more and more, and they never find the bottom of their informational seeking. So that is actually a pretty good thing for these people, although since the sixth house also represents enemies, these people tend to have a lot of enemies in their life, and their enemies can be quite violent, especially if they have planets in the sixth house. They can get in a lot of fights, like if they have Mars in the sixth house or the North Node in the sixth house, or like Saturn in the sixth house or something. These people can get in a lot of fights and can get in trouble because of that. So these people's seventh house always corresponds to Libra, which is your relationships and your negotiations and your partnerships. These people's seventh house is Sagittarius, so what they primarily tend to look for somebody who is philosophical in a partner, somebody who is intelligent. And the difference between the Gemini and Sagittarius kind of intelligence is that the Gemini ascendant people are going to be mostly interested in hands-on learning and thinking for themselves, whereas their partner, who is Sagittarius in quality, is going to typically be very interested in one sort of philosophy school. So they might be very religious, or they might be like a scientist or some kind of philosophical person who's committed to one school of thought. Now, depending on where this person's Jupiter is, that's going to take on the flavor of their seventh house. So if somebody's Jupiter is in like a well-placed sign, like a water sign, like Scorpio or Pisces, these people can get somebody who's less ideological as a partner and more just interested in research. But there's always going to be sort of an intellectual flavor to their relationships, because Sagittarius is their other half. These people's eighth house is Capricorn. And because eighth house in part represents longevity, but it also represents research and commitment. And Capricorn is the delay sign. It's the sign of hard work and effort. These people tend to remain young for quite a long time, but they also are extremely anxious about their research, and they work really hard at trying to figure out, like knowing everything they can, basically. And they can get fixated on projects for years and years at a time. These people's ninth house corresponds to Sagittarius, which is your higher learning and your education and your teachers. These people's ninth house is Aquarius, so they are very interested in learning things that are practical. So they're often drawn into stuff like magical philosophy, because they pretty much early on realized that a lot of what people preach in religion is not functional. So they look for functional religions or functional belief systems. So they tend to either be very into the occult or very into science, or both. And they don't really care where the information comes from, as long as it's useful. And they will tell people, like, your ideas are stupid because they're not useful. They don't do anything. So that is part of this people. These people's 10th house, which corresponds to Capricorn. It represents hard work, effort, and your impact on the world, and your reputation. These people, tend to have Pisces in the 10th house. Pisces in the 10th house, you really show like the theoretical side of Pisces, the imagination. These people have a very weird schedule, and they spend time weirdly. They tend to sleep pretty late, and they tend to not necessarily be interested in conventional careers, because it takes away from their ability to think for themselves and use their intelligence to process information. So they don't really care about the reputation, because to them, reputation gets in the way of learning new things. And they feel comfortable when they're learning new things, and that is their mission in this life, so that's their main purpose, so they don't really care about their reputation or their career or impact. But they tend to end up leaving an impact anyway, because the 10th house Pisces can also be a spiritual teacher. So they end up teaching people new things that they didn't already know, and that's how they make their mark on the world. These people's 11th house, which represents functional knowledge and science and spending time in a more productive way, is Aries. So these people's gains in life are directly related to their physical health and their own personal sense of ambition. Because these people are very intelligent, they typically have the requirement just to act out their ideas, and then they will get gains from these ideas. But acting out their ideas can be a little bit tricky, because they can be a lot up in their heads. So exercise is fundamental to these people. In order to help them make their ideas into reality, they have to basically exert physical effort. And these people's 12th house, which is isolation, spirituality, and fantasy life, their 12th house is Taurus. So these people have very stable imaginations. They can see typically like visual pictures moving through their heads, like movies and pictures, like crystal clear in their head, and also they can sort of live out realities inside their own minds, because Taurus is a fixed earth sign, but it's put in this house of the imagination. So these people see their imagination as if it's right there in front of them, and if it's very real. And also it helps them act out their goals, because they can typically, their brains are very powerful, so they can see something in their head and then just go do it. And that's how the 12th and 11th house can relate to each other, in that they can think something out and then go and physically act it out and get that thing. So that is my analysis of the Gemini Ascendant. Oh, and one more thing about the Taurus 12th house. The Taurus 12th house, because it's in the 12th house, these people tend to not care very much about their material possessions, in the same way that they don't really care very much about their reputation. Because to them, the ideas and the information and the abstractions are way more important than anything material or social status. All right, so that is my analysis of the Gemini Ascendant, and tune in next time for the Cancer Ascendant video.